Cuyahoga Valley Photographic.
This meeting is being recorded.
Let's try that again. Good evening and welcome. I'm Bruce Wingus, president of Cuyahoga Valley Photo Society, and welcome to our January presentation by Jim McCormac. Sounds like it's going to be a good, interesting evening. Just got a couple of things to share with you all before we get into our presentation tonight. Next month on February 22nd, we have a presentation scheduled from Jennifer King on the fine art of black and white photography. That will be a Zoom presentation. In March, we have a presentation scheduled from the Cuyahoga Valley National Park Ranger, Ryan Timbath, and that will be an in-person presentation at Happy Days Lodge. We hope to see you all there on March 14th at 7 p.m. And then in April, we have a presentation on the 19th. That'll be Zoom on 3 keys to bird photography by a fellow named Scott Keys. So those are the programs we've got coming up. Mark your calendars and check our Facebook page and check your emails for those of you who are members of the Photo Society for those updates. And if you're not a member of the Photo Society, please join us. As I say many times, we're all nice people. We come from good families, so go ahead and join us. We'd like to have you in the Conservancy. Now I'd like to introduce Janine Hobby, who is our newest steering committee member, and she also has taken over the programming chair from Steve Ash, who retired from that. And thank you, Steve, and welcome Janine. And Janine will introduce our speaker tonight. So Janine, it's all yours.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me well enough? Okay, good. Okay, so I'm delighted to introduce Jim McCormac tonight. Just a little bit about him. So Jim worked for the Ohio Department of Natural Resources for 31 years, first as a field botanist and then later specializing in wildlife diversity projects, especially those involving birds. Beginning in 2003, photography became a passion and a growing addiction for Jim. His beautiful and important photographs dovetail with his work in identifying and conserving nature. I think somebody's mic is on. Somebody's mic. So Jim has had hundreds of photographs published in a wide variety of forums, from fireworks to fungi, mothing to Amish birding. It is fair to say that Jim has seen and documented Ohio in ways no one else has. In addition to seeing his work tonight, you can go view his photos further on his website, www.JimMcCormac.com, where he also blogs on the diverse flora and fauna of Ohio. Jim has written a column, Nature, for Ohio's largest circulation newspaper, the Columbus Dispatch, since 2005. And this is one of the longest running natural history columns in publication, having debuted in 1922, and with only 3 authors to date, Jim being the third. McCormac has written scores of articles for other publications and is a longtime contributing editor for Bird Watchers Digest, where he pens a regular photography column. In 2015, the Ohio League of Sportsmen named Jim Conservation Communicator of the Year. Jim has authored or co-authored 7 books, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but the most recent of which is about to hit the sales racks and has already hit Amazon. One of his books, Wild Ohio, The Best of Our Natural Heritage, won the 2010 Ohioana Book Award. Other books include Birds of Ohio, Great Lakes Nature Guide, and the Ohio Lake Erie Birding Trail Guidebook. Jim was a co-author of the second Atlas of Breeding Birds in Ohio and was a co-author of the technical manual Floristic Quality Assessment Index for Vascular Plants and Mosses for the state of Ohio, which was published by the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency. Now, with his co-author, Chelsea Gottfried, Jim's new book, Gardening for Moths, published by Ohio University Press, is now at the printer and should be out by late February. Even though the book was just listed on Amazon a few days ago, it's already ranked #1 in Midwestern gardening books, #1 in butterfly books. As Jim notes, butterflies are essentially moths. and number 2 in all entomology books. That is all from pre-sales. The 280-page book features over 500 color photographs and profiles nearly 150 native plant species and about the same number of moth species. Covers a region that includes 9 Midwestern states. And the book makes the case for moths' importance in food webs, such as for bats and birds. And it talks about how moths play a large role in pollination services. Jim makes the point beyond that of butterflies, which they greatly outnumber in both species and sheer numbers. Jim and his co-author cover moth myths and reputation, moth watching tips, moth photography, human impacts on moths, moth conservation, and more. And as Jim writes, the book's main purpose is, quote, to shine a light on a facet of natural history that normally remains in the dark and is quite poorly known to most people. Gardeners collectively have tremendous power to influence our environment for the good, and this book offers a path forward by helping a charismatic group of insects of inestimable importance to the natural world, unquote. And just prior to coming online tonight, Jim let us know that he has an 8th book coming out, actually, on dragonflies and damselflies, probably later in the summer. Is that right, Jim? In the summer?
Next year.
Oh, next year. Okay.
Yeah,
Don't want to
a
jump
year
the gun.
from
You got the new one out now.
Yeah. 2 co-authors on that too. It's not just mine.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Okay, so finally, a prolific speaker, Jim has delivered hundreds of presentations on an array of topics throughout the Eastern United States, including this one for us here tonight. Please join me now in welcoming the talented and highly respected Jim McCormac.
Thank you, Janine. That was the best introduction I think I've ever had. You did your homework. I learned things about myself I didn't even know, I think. No, that was great. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate the thought you obviously put into that.
No problem.
Steve Ash, thanks for inviting me originally. And Ann, thanks for solving some technical glitches before everyone got on here. Much appreciated. Let me see if I can share this now. Okay. Got one more little step here. Bear with me. I'm trying to find that place where I swapped the screen.
You said it was a Zoom setting?
Yeah, it is, and it doesn't seem to be popping up now. But wait, maybe. No, it's not that.
I think it's.
I'm flummoxed. You guys can probably all see my right side of the screen. It's not filling the screen.
Yeah, right now we're just seeing the PowerPoint itself.
Okay.
Screen
Nothing
sharing
yet?
again.
No, just the PowerPoint here.
Okay, I'm gonna try and just reload it because it was showing on my end.
Okay, make sure that when you share your screen, you've got the full screen version displaying.
That's okay. It says I'm screen sharing,
Yeah, you are.
but you're not seeing the PowerPoint.
We're seeing the actual software interface rather than the slideshow.
Okay, what about now?
Still seeing the interface, but we can see what you want to have us see, so this works.
Okay,
Hey, Jim, if I could make a comment. At the top left corner,
Yeah.
you see some little icons. There's PowerPoint and a refresh. The 5th one over looks like the screen that you might need to click on. Nope, way to the left. See it at the top row? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that. If that's not it, I don't know
There.
what to tell you.
I think you should be seeing it here in a second. Maybe. Nothing.
And then Jim, down at in the orange line at the bottom of the your window, there is next to the slide bar, just to the left of that is also one of those screen elements that you might need to click on.
Um,
The
gosh, I don't
bottom
know.
right.
Hold on. So nothing. You guys still not seeing a full screen.
No, we're just still seeing the PowerPoint.
Okay, gosh. I
Jim,
wonder
do
what-
you see that orange bar at the bottom of the screen?
Where on the screen would this be?
Very
Right
bottom.
at the absolute bottom.
Yeah,
It's an orange line that goes all the way across.
yeah, I can see it.
Yeah,
Okay,
keep
go
going.
over to, there's
Click that one.
that. See if that
This-
works.
That's what I was doing a different way. I don't know why.
No,
Nothing.
Hey, Jim, can you select slideshow in the menu items where it says file across the top? And then I think it says start slideshow.
Yeah, I can try that.
Yeah, so you see the menu items across the top, select slideshow. There you go.
That's
From the
it.
beginning. I'm seeing it on my end.
okay.
But nothing yet on that.
Yeah,
your end.
okay, we've got the presentation. We're still seeing your notes, though.
Okay, I can easily fix that. I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. Okay, this should fix it for you.
There
Yes.
you go.
Thank
Perfect.
you. And I'm
Perfect.
very sorry. Someone's microphone. I was telling Ann at the beginning when we had another snag of a different sort that I sort of semi-dread Zoom meetings. I've done a lot, but it seems there's always some glitch. But we fixed it. Hopefully it'll stay this way. So off we go. I want to talk about our obsession with imagery. As one who writes a lot and does a fair bit of speaking, it would be very hard in this day and age to get away without using photos. People have come to expect it. You can read the slides with notes on them like this for yourself, but I'll just summarize it at the bottom. 4 billion photographs worldwide every single day are getting out there. Much of that on social media. So we're fixated on imagery, and that means good photos are important, and that's what I'm going to talk about. People take them all kinds of ways, as you know. The iPhones and other smartphones have become so good. The cameras, it's sometimes wants to make me throw away certain lenses that I have and just use that. But that's probably how most photos get out there. Probably the next step up would be bridge cameras like this Panasonic, which makes great bridge cameras, where they look like SLRs, the interchangeable lenses, but they're not. They're very simple to operate and user friendly. So that's a good, at least launch pad for a budding photographer. And a lot of people have these. They're very inexpensive too, and produce a lot of nice photos with them. Then you can get up into this stuff. And I just got to tell you really quick, I've been taking photos since the film days, and that was all documentary mostly. I was not smitten with photography. I thought it was kind of a hassle. Little tubes you put in there, and I had to send them off somewhere to get them developed and wait a few days. And none of this was that interesting to me at that time. When those first bridge cameras hit in the early 2000s, I bought one. Now I was digital, and everything changed at that point. And the main reason I learned to take photos, or try to learn, and this is still true, is I didn't want to borrow other people's images or ask them to use them for all the talks I was giving. I wanted my own. And then I wanted to show exactly what I wanted to show. And that was the genesis of it all. And then, like probably everyone here, I over time just became fascinated with the art of it. And then to a bit the technology, but I'm more into the art side of it. And now I'm addicted, thoroughly addicted. So it was just this progression from point and shoots basically all the way up to that, which is a Canon 5D Mark IV. And that's one of my real workhorse lenses. It's an 800. I do a lot of bird photography. So that's where this addiction has gone so far. It's expensive too, as you know, but hey, now I've got 3 bodies I use consistently, sometimes all in the same day, but this is the new workhorse, and it's a mirrorless camera. This is the newest evolution of cameras, and it is as close to magic as I've ever seen. Love the camera, Canon R5, with its eye detection mode and all these things. Even birds in flight, one of the real holy grails of shooters, can be fairly easy with this camera. The lenses, I've got a bunch. I do collect lenses to some degree. Now, this is over many years. I don't tend to get rid of them. So I have all these, but there's a couple that are real workhorses. And I'm not going to talk a whole lot about the photography of these images, but I'm just doing it up front a little bit here. But that's a Canon 100 macro, total workhorse. I probably shot more images through that lens than all the other ones combined. The other one is the 16-35 wide angle. That's really, really important to me, not just for landscapes. I do a lot of macro with it. I probably have some examples in here of that. And then this is a 70-200 on the right, left. And a lot of you know that lens, no matter what you shoot with. That is a staple of many photographers' arsenal, wedding photographers, everyone. I use mine mostly for, believe it or not, macro with an extension tube, and then also a lot of tighter landscapes. And then the one next to it is a Canon 400DO. And that is amazing. It's flyweight, and it is the best bird in flight lens I've ever seen, at least in the world of Canon. So these things I use constantly, the ones I just showed you, and they cover pretty much all bases. So in terms of ethos, which I think is a good thing to have if you're a photographer, we've all heard the horror stories of owls and things that people don't necessarily practice good ethics with, but mine is basically no one dies. That's pretty simple. That could really be that first 2 bullet points. Even the plants, you know, the bugs, they don't kill them. Everyone's getting away alive. I don't even want to molest them. In my perfect world, my subject would never know that I took its photograph. And that does happen a lot, but not always. And then this comes with time. I think it sounds sort of spacey, but, you know, envisioning your image beforehand. But why do you know what I mean? With time, you kind of know what you want to try and capture before it even happens, because you're knowledgeable about the subject and what it might do or how it'll interact. And then this is what I want to talk a lot about, is just developing a positive use for all these images. I mean, to me, if I'm going to take all this time and effort and money to get these images, I want to use them. I want them to be impactful in some way. And I'll talk about that. So here's a little example of storytelling with photos. This is one of my very favorite places. If you haven't been there, go. Cedar Bog, Urbana, Ohio. One of the richest natural areas in the state. It's actually a fen, a very rare type of wetland, a peatland. There's what it looks like from the air. That, you know, I used to do a lot of aerial photography. I did a lot of flying with the Division of Wildlife for various reasons, and would always take a couple lenses up and shoot photos, and that's a learning curve too. But this is one that I took up in the helicopter, I think, showing the open meadows, and then all the dark trees. Those are arborvitae, or white cedar, the only swamp in Ohio that has white cedar. This becomes very common a couple 100 miles to the north of us, but has vanished down here. There's one of the fen meadows in summer, late summer, peak of blooming for many things, very unusual habitat, the richest plant diversity of any habitat in the state of Ohio. Stunning as it comes along, this would be June, and that's all called Fin Indian plantain. It's a member of the sunflower family, and it's quite rare in Ohio and only occurs in fins. It's an obligate to fin habitats. Peatlands, we've lost 98% of them since the time of European settlement, this being a peatland. So obviously the denizens of these peatlands have become rare as well. The building blocks of fins are sedges. And this is a much underappreciated group of plants. This is Carex flava, the yellow sedge. The genus Carex is the biggest genus of plants in Ohio by a long shot. Nothing even comes close. The family that the sedges are in, the Cyperaceae, is by far the biggest family in the plants in Ohio. And they're incredibly important ecologically. And I like to photograph them. They're a fun challenge. There's many other rare plants here. You know about our non-native honeysuckles overrunning things. Here's one of the native honeysuckles, the wild honeysuckle. Real beauty, and it's really declined in part because of its non-native brethren choking it out, but it has a foothold in cedar bog still. And many orchids. This is grass pink orchid. You can see it right off the boardwalk in mid-June if you go over there. This is a much scarcer one at Cedar Bog and is pretty well hidden back in the deep swamp forest. One of the few photos I'll show you of a plant where I actually use flash on it. I don't like flash on plants generally, but that's called the purple fringed orchid. And it's state endangered, I believe. But here's the orchid everyone goes to Cedar Bog to see, and it is a hit. People who don't even like plants like this one. That's the showy lady slipper, Cypripedium reginae. It's known from about 4 or 5 sites in Ohio. That's it. Cedar Bog's got by far the most. These plants can live to a very ripe old age and become essentially shrub-like or bushy. The flowers can be 2 to 3 feet off the ground. It's really spectacular and well worth it. Photographers, of course, absolutely love shooting it because it's so showy. But my personal bent, I tend to be more attracted to the obscure things. And this is obscure. This is green woodland orchid, Platanthera clavellata, which grows on little mossy hummocks, often on tree roots like this one's doing, deep in the gloom of wet forests, wet woods. It is not known to have, the pollinators are unknown. I'm really interested in pollinators. So I sat out there late into the night one time, set up on this, hoping a moth, it's usually a moth that pollinates these orchids, would come in, and nothing did. So that's still out there to do. If you look in the close-up on the right side, you'll see long white tubes sticking down towards the stem from each flower. Those are called nectar spurs. The nectar is down in the very base of that, and it takes a moth with a long proboscis to reach all the way down to the nectar and get that reward. And turn it pollinates it. Many other things. This is false asphodel, very rare member of the lily family, horned bladderwort. And I took this photo probably 5+ years ago. Horned bladderwort is one of the rarest plants in Ohio. There are only 2 sites, one other site not far from Cedar Bog. It's a truly carnivorous plant, which we have very few of those in this part of the world. But this one is, it has little bladders and actually traps insects in its root system and assimilates them. But the thing about this is we always thought it was horned bladderwort, Utricularia cornuta. It came to light because of a researcher out west that came across our material from Ohio. It's not that at all. It's this thing called a pale bladderwort. Utricularia ochroluca, disjunct by like from here to Illinois. It's just remarkable. That's exactly what it is. It's really similar, and it fooled all of us botanists until this guy came along and nailed the identification. So you never know. And he did it through photos. He didn't even see a specimen. He knew what it was. So photos can serve identification purposes as well, as we all know. This is not the most showy photo. It's in fruit. It's in perfect shape for being in fruit, but it's called prairie valerian. Extremely important plant in Ohio, one of about 100 species of vascular plants that was discovered and described to science from Ohio. The sites that they're discovered at are called type localities. Most type localities have long been destroyed. This one has not. This was discovered in Cedar Bog in the 1830s by a teacher named John Samples, and it's still there. This is the original type locality, a photograph of the brethren of the exact material that Samples saw first in the 1830s. That's a spin meadow in late fall at Cedar Bog. This is why photographers like this. And if you haven't been there, you should really, really go. Because when there's that kind of floristic diversity, there will be bugs galore. And I don't know about you, but I love to shoot bugs. I mean, you just can't even make these things up. One, it's never ending. You will never run dry. I actually know bird photographers because, you know, I'm kind of getting bored with birds a little. I've like shot everything, which would be impressive, even in North America, but you can come close if you work at it. You will never, ever do that with bugs, insects. There's too many. This is a phantom crane fly hanging from a sedge leaf. There's a cool little homicidal looking bumblebee, but it's not a bumblebee at all. It's a robber fly, one of a group of robber flies that mimic bumblebees, probably so they look dangerous when they just sit out in the open, because they're hunting like red-tailed hawks from a perch with good sight lines, usually an open leaf. But if you look like something like that, it's possible that birds might leave you alone, hence the look of a bumblebee. And there's a little skipper sitting on a leaf. I think it's a Hobomok skipper, or it's sitting on a thistle, a swamp thistle, which is a fairly rare thistle in Ohio. And these were all taken at Cedar Bog. There's our biggest butterfly, spectacular, the giant swallowtail nectaring on swamp milkweed. Milkweeds, of course, are wonderful, both for moss and butterflies. Wonderful nectar source. Dragonflies galore. This is one of our most common ones, but one of our most showy ones, the 12-spotted skimmer. It's on a blazing star in a meadow at Cedar Bog. And things like this are all over, common species, but it's the rare ones at Cedar Bog that really get the odonatologists excited. This is a female eastern red damsel, which is only found around seepages, spring-fed wetlands like Cedar Bog. It's on the flowers of ninebark. A state endangered dragonfly, female. This is a female elfin skimmer. It's 3/4 of an inch long, the smallest dragonfly in North America. Very rare in Ohio. Females look like hornets or wasps, and they twitch their abdomen like one, and they're so tiny when you see them standing upright down in the sedges. That's what you think it is a little wasp, probably. This is another case of something that got overlooked. We thought it was a common species. It was not a common species. Someone identified it from out west, where this peyote dancer becomes common. They saw photos from Cedar Bog and knew it was a peyote dancer, not what we thought it was. And it's now been found in a couple other fens in that immediate part of west central Ohio, plus Cedar Bog. But Cedar Bog was the original site that we picked it up. There are even lizards there. That's an old male 5-line skink. They get orange around the head, especially in the breeding season. And get pretty big, you know, 8 inches, 9 inches long. They run along the boardwalk. And it's really fun to see people who just, I guess to me, would be normal people who don't, you know all that much about nature, see these for the first time. They're stunned. A lizard, what is a lizard doing in Ohio? You know, and there's a good chance to educate people that we have 7 species. That's one of the most common. A lot of amphibians too. That's a young gray tree frog, you know, green in this case, but he's a youngster, but they can sort of change color over time depending on their surroundings. And just tree frogs you cannot beat as photo subjects. And birds too, a lot of birds. I love birds. They tend to still be my very favorite thing, I think partly because of the challenge, but this was taken at Cedar Bog. This is a young brown thrasher. Look at his eye. It's not yellow yet. The fellow's probably only been out of the nest 2 weeks or so. Cedar waxwings, lots of those. Just such a suave, elegant bird. It's probably should have been our state bird. And then this is a common species in the meadow out front at Cedar Bog, the yellow-breasted chat, which in your field guides will be under the warblers, but it's not. It was recently given its own family, the Passarellidae, I think it is. And the yellow-breasted chat is the only thing in the whole family. It truly is unique, and I hate that word. Unique's overused, but that's a unique bird. So another thing we did, and this was just last spring, I wanted to do an Ohio amphibian big day. You know, birders, we do the big days for birds. That's a very well established and commonly done thing. But as far as I knew, no one had done one for amphibians in Ohio, and probably never will again. But we did it, so we have the record because we have no competitors. So I'm throwing it out. Maybe someone will do this. But anyway, we scoured 4 counties in southern Ohio around Portsmouth, Scioto County being in the core. And we went 24 hours. I think we actually worked 22 of those hours. So we didn't get any sleep, but of the 37 species of frogs, salamanders, toads known in Ohio, we found 25. It was pretty good. And we tried to photo document everything, and I think we did. Here we are in a stream, a beautiful little stream near the town of North Portsmouth, basically north of Portsmouth in Scioto County. Kelly Capuzzi, John Howard in the middle, and Aaron Crank. Aaron's a young guy. He's a dynamo, just a whiz on finding herps, you know, amphibians and reptiles. And we were looking for a really special one in there. But that was our team, plus me. I'll show you what we found in there in a minute. Found lots of stuff. Here's an American toad singing. They're wonderful subjects when they're singing in April, when they're in full throat. That's a pickerel frog. It looks kind of like a leopard frog, but lives on wooded streams, corridors, peeking out of a rock. These were all taken on a big day. Tried to make some art out of them when time permitted. It didn't always do that. And there's what we found in that stream I showed you the picture of, a mud puppy. Really hard to get. They're not all that rare, but it's a huge salamander that is strictly aquatic, lives under rocks. And Aaron knew a honey hole for them, and it took him all of about 8 minutes to drum one of these things up. They're basically axolotls or permanent larvae. They never shed those frilly gills. It looks like they have boas around their neck or something, but those are the gills, and they keep them throughout their long lives. They can live a long time. And that was a real coup to get that for our big day. So was this. This is a Kentucky spring salamander. It's very much of a southerner in Ohio. We had several of those. Red spotted newts are really easy. You've all heard of newts. The larval stage is called a red eft. If you work crossword puzzles, you've definitely come across the word F. They use it all the time as fillers, but we had a lot of red spotted newts. It's pretty common. This is not common. This is one of the rare, arguably the rarest salamander in Ohio. The green salamander, which is only known from a tiny portion of Adams County, where it lives in limestone cliff fissures and only emerges at nightfall under cover of darkness to come out. Real holy grail, and we got 8 of them. So anyway, I didn't want to let this stuff go to waste, so I wrote a newspaper column about it for the Columbus Dispatch, which hopefully a number of people got to read, and that increased awareness. And we talked about what we did in other forums as well, because we want to, basically the overarching thing with a lot of us who would call ourselves conservation photographers, we just want to create a greater interest in protecting habitats. So that's how we used our big amphibian day to do that. And then in the future, if we continue it, we want to seek pledges per species and raise funds for the Nature Conservancy or groups like that. So you've all heard that a picture is worth 1,000 words. That goes way back. That long predates cameras and was originally in different words applied to art, paintings. Da Vinci is credited with the first really version of that. And then it took on different words, but meaning the same thing until the 1911 one, the last bullet point. And that was a newspaper guy, and he basically came up with what we use today, but it's very apropos. That's why pictures are so great. I can tell you this, when I write my column, I usually have about 600 words. That isn't a lot of words. But I save so many words because I always run a photo with the column. I don't have to describe what a robin looks like or anything. If that's the subject, they can look at the picture. Another thing, and I always say that in these talks about photography, nature photography at least, but to become better, learn more about nature. I mean, that is the very best thing one can do. So you understand, one, how to find things, but the subtleties of their behavior and that sort of thing. So a good photograph should do at least all those things, if not more. But to go back to that, a picture is worth 1,000 words. This is a beautiful autumnal scene in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And it's just really hard to put that into words. The photo says it all within a second. Same with that. That was a scene. I was actually last fall at Conkle's Hollow, nature preserving Hocking County, the Hocking Hills. Beautiful early morning. You know, that's another thing about photography. It's unfortunate, I suppose, to a lot of people, but you have to really get up early. So we were up there on that ridge, way back in there at dawn, essentially, to get the early morning light and the fog while it was still there. But hard to put that into words, easy to show someone in a picture and really create an allure about the site that you just showed them. That's Battelle Darby Metro Park in near Columbus, the finest prairie restoration probably in the state of Ohio at dawn, crack of dawn. So, and as you know, you got to get there before the sun comes up. That's always when the light's best, and that's when this was taken, foggy landscape. Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, showing us how they got their name. I didn't put that blue in there. Another sunrise shot that required a really, really early morning. So I already alluded to this, but personally, at least, I want to use these in some way. And it's my belief, even though I have written a lot, I suppose, and still do write a lot, but people are still storytellers. For most of the 200,000 years Homo sapiens have been around, that's how we communicated, verbally, orally, stories. And I see it all the time in talks. The people that tell stories, make things into a story, they always seem more interesting, at least to me, and I think many others, because I've talked to a lot of people about it. And that's what I try and do with photos, and it can take a long time to amass a story like Cedar Bog that I showed you earlier. That's years of photographs, and there's things I'm never gonna finish, little sub-stories where many players are involved, yet I don't have photos of all those players, but I'm always working at it, and I have this huge bucket list of required photos in the back of my mind. There's a little story in a story. So people would see that, a lot of people, not you probably, but others that don't know as much, and go, oh, look at the little bee, which is so cool. But of course, it's not a bee at all. It's a flower fly, a syrphid flower fly, big group of the flies, and they're mimics of bees. They even twitch their abdomens like them. That's protection. That's trying to look like something that might pack a punch so a bird won't eat it or whatever. But this is tiny. The little water pimpernel that it's on, that flower would measure 2 millimeters across. 2 millimeters. Hold your finger up. That offers scale, that this minute world that's largely unseen. This is one reason I'm so into macro photography, because the vast majority of organisms out there are not bald eagles or rough-legged hawks or deer, things like that. They're these little things. Some of them are incredibly cool. That is a small group of insects for us, but they're called mantid flies. This is a Say's mantid fly, and they look like someone welded a praying mantis front end to a lacewing, and then maybe put a wasp body on there for good measure. And they're just insanely crazy looking. They're very predatory. They come into our moss sheets at night. They'll walk around the sheet killing moths and eating them. because that's what they do. They're not very big though. You really have to look close. That's probably an inch in length. But to top it off, this particular species is a paper wasp mimic. The body is a spitting image of a paper wasp. Here's a case where a photo really led to something interesting, and it's this exact photograph. We were doing a singing insect workshop down in Adams County in 2014, 13 or 14. And I think Lisa Rainsong, who I know is on here, was there, but Will Hirschberger was there. He's an expert on singing insects. And anyway, at night, these come out and sing at night, katydids, things like that, crickets. So we'd have night field trips. And I was leading one of them. And I heard a species that I knew it was a virtuoso katydid, but it didn't sound right. And the habitat was totally wrong for the only one known in Ohio. So I found it. I stumbled into the woods where it was in this little opening, and I saw the singer. Just like birds, they often get up, tee up on a prominent perch, so their sound goes out farther because they're singing to attract females. And I got this one photograph. That's it. And then the flash spooked the bug. It usually doesn't, but sometimes flash well. In this case, it spooked the katydid, and it was, I never saw it again. Took this photo back, showed it to Will. And to make a long story short, he got really excited. He goes, no, that's not the common virtuoso katydid that should be in Ohio. And what it is, it's a new species, undescribed species. The DNA has been looked at, everything. The sonograms have been analyzed. It's completely different. Hasn't been named yet, and I'm not sure where that process is, but that was all from a photograph. Without the photo, probably wouldn't have gotten that far. And now we found them many other places in Adams County, but only Adams County, nowhere else. Adams County, of course, is full of unusual prairies and unusual creatures. So prairies, here's another story and photos of sorts. Prairies are an unfortunate legacy. At the time of European settlement, late mid 1700s, when the whole onrush started west of the Alleghenies, at least 5% of Ohio was prairie. Lots of prairie, extensive openings of them. We changed things really, really fast. And it was soon discovered that prairie soil was some of the richest soil on earth and grew wonderful crops. 1837, John Deere launched a steel plow on the environment, basically, and it changed overnight. Now there's less than probably 0.1% of all those prairies left. So for a while it was better. They plowed them up like this. This scene is in the Pickaway Plains, south of Columbus. But farms used to be a lot more friendly with brushy areas and fence rows and tree lines, that sort of thing. And it was still pretty good for birds. In some places it still is. This is an Amish farm in Highland County where they are far more friendly to the landscape, even with farming, than the big industrial agriculture is today. That's what industrial scale agriculture looks like. This is in a former prairie, Killdeer Plains, if you're familiar with that. I took it from the airplane, but that's nuclear Armageddon. I'm sorry, there's nothing living there. They've taken a scene that used to look like that and transformed it into basically a triculture, usually a monoculture at any given time, but a triculture of corn, wheat, or soybeans, almost devoid of life from what we're looking at now. So we sometimes learn from our mistakes, and there's been a big effort to put prairies back on the landscape, but it's never going to be even a shadow of what once was. That's Huffman Prairie on Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's just in the shadows of Dayton, Ohio. That's where the Wright brothers had their flying school and basically honed aviation. And the prairie's still there, 100 acres of it. So all these birds, like meadowlarks, those of you who have been around birding long enough remember when meadowlarks were not a big deal at all. These beautiful blackbirds of prairies and open fields, they've declined tremendously. One of the many victims of how we've treated former prairie regions. Same with little dick thistles. They aren't nearly as common. That's a cardinal. It's a relative of the cardinal. Here's a very well-dressed blackbird, the bobolink. And bobolinks are primarily prairie species, at least in this part of the world, and they've suffered accordingly. A long-distance migrant, the entire population goes to a small area of South America to overwinter, and then just like clockwork, the last few days of April, first few days of May, in they tumble, the males first, and they have this just incredibly ornate song that sounds like R2-D2 from Star Wars. There's another one that's become much rarer. All these things are, because they're all prairie species in this part of the world. So anything that was a prairie species is on hard times because we've destroyed so much of their habitat. This is a sedgerin in full song. Sounds like a sewing machine. Upland sandpiper. This is a bird that's become almost extirpated as a breeder from Ohio, but they're still there. They've taken to airports. This one was at the local Ohio State University Airport where they breed every year. But overall, this has just fallen off the radar screen in Ohio. A real shame. No bird that nests in Ohio migrates farther than this. It goes clear to the end of the world, to southern South America, where it overwinters in the Pampas region. A real quick note on photos, and I'm not seeing any questions. If anyone has them, you can throw them out, but I won't see them. Steve would have to tell me, or someone, but I will make a note on this photo. I've never ever been entirely happy with any photo I've ever taken, and probably never will be. You know how that works, but this would probably be one I would be about as happy with a bird photo as anything I've ever shot. A lot of it's luck. The bokeh, the background was just so nice and two-toned, out of my control. It was just that way. But learning more about nature, everyone that knows this bird knows that when they alight on a fence post, they keep their wings up for about 5 seconds. And I knew this, so I was all ready for this. I saw him coming in. I'm like, yes. And the wing angle was just perfect, but he's giving me the right head angle. Bird's looking about 10 degrees your direction, spot on. It creates interest, like they're interested, looking at the camera, and his bill was open because he was still calling. So that one, I was partly luck, but maybe some knowledge got me that. This was luck, big time. As a footnote to all this, if you want to get people keen about something, show them the babies. People, oh my God, they love babies. But here's a baby upland sandpiper from the same site. I just showed you its parents. So that bird was on that fence post, and I saw a rustling in the grass. I didn't know what it was. And 2 little upland sandpipers ran out in front of me across the road, and I got one of them. Luck. Hinslow sparrow, another prairie denizen that's become much rarer, has the shortest bird song of any species in Ohio, at least. It's about a 3/5 of a second cricket-like chirp, but it's got a real, I don't know, it's very charismatic once you know the song. They put everything they got into that little 3/5 of a second chirp. So there's Huffman Prairie again. At Dayton, which everyone should go visit. It's open to the public. You can go mid-July. Put that on your calendar, July 15th. You're right in the sweet spot where it's going to look just like that with all those coneflowers and other things. But there's a lot of prairie plants, of course, that have become quite rare too. And that's one of them. This is the royal catchfly. It's a prairie obligate. If you see that in the wild, it is in a prairie or a remnant growing in the original prairie soil. That's the only place it grows. Towering member of the pink family. It can be 6 feet tall, sometimes even taller than that, festooned with all these brilliant scarlet flowers. And you know what red means in terms of pollinators, and this only has one pollinator. That. Only ruby-throated hummingbirds pollinate catchfly. Don't take this the wrong way, but with birds, I'm often a real snobby about what they're on. So I don't like them on all these non-native salvias and things people plant that the hummingbirds love. I want them on stuff like that, ideally. And this was a shot I was really after for a long time, and there it is. But that's it. Nothing else can pollinate the plant. and it is like warfare. The year I made that shot, I estimated there was well over 100 hummingbirds in the immediate area. And they're just, you know, how we'd all be dead if they were the size of swans. They're so violent, it's crazy. But they're guarding these plants like crazy and attacking each other. It was the coolest scene, and you could see that yourself. And then there's the money shot. There's one, you know, just face deep into the long corolla tube that he's got to get, you know, the nectar is way down in the base of that. And the flower is really flimsy, so no insect can really land on it. It just falls over. The reason they call them catch fly is the calyx, which is that long tube that the flower is coming out, is sticky like Elmer's glue. So even if an insect climbed up there, it would never make it to the flower. It couldn't get through the Elmer's glue, only the hummingbird. Here's another little example I wanted to mention. This is one of my favorite conservation groups, the Arc of Appalachia. A lot of you might know Highlands Nature Sanctuary. That's sort of their core piece, but they're probably up to 7,000 or 8,000 acres now, something like that. And they just got this. This is an old reclaimed strip mine, you know, kind of the worst of what we've done to the hill country. Just shave it all off and pull the coal out and leave it as a mess. But they do plant grasses and whatnot. Almost everything in that shot is non-native, the grasses. But hey, you know, birds made hay out of this, amazingly. And that little Henslow sparrow that I showed you, this was shot in there, it was full of them. They adapted to them, this rare sparrow. So that was kind of cool. So, you know, good things can come out of the bad too. And now that site is protected and can be managed for the sparrows, which it will be. Water quality is another big issue, one that I'm really interested in. It's very, very important. You know, we have not been kind to water quality, as you probably know, but we're getting better. We're learning there as well. Now here's a stream with no issues whatsoever. This is a tributary of the New River down in West Virginia. Just a superb stream in every sense, the water quality, the forest around it and all that thing. But that's how all of our streams used to look, more or less, all of them prior to settlement. They were well buffered and very clean, the water. Now you gotta work harder to find such streams, but they are out there. And one of the real iconic indicators of high water quality in streams like I just showed you are the darters. They're little members of the perch family. And they could be thought of as the warblers of the underwater world, because in a brief period in spring, when the water temperature hits a certain point, it's breeding season, and the males become just these vivid colors. This is an orange throat darter that lives in really small streams. They don't have air bladders or swim bladders, so they just sit on the bottom and they lunge out after small macroinvertebrate insects and whatnot, and that's their food source. That's the female next to her. She doesn't turn these bright colors, just like the warblers. Only the male does. This was another holy grail fish that I'd been after for a long time. It was a fair bit of work to get them, but one of the rarest species in Ohio. It looks like a little salmon, but it's just a few inches long. It's a rosy-side dace that lives in these headwater streams, which I will note that the legislature of Ohio, in their infinite lack of wisdom, removed protections for headwater stream to some degree in the last few months. Complete ignorance. But I won't get into that. But anyway, that's where this fish and many other very cool aquatic organisms live, headwater streams. That's only known from basically a handful of counties. This is far rarer yet. This is only known from one stream. This was another holy grail fish to photograph. It's well named, Popeye Shiner. When you see an eye like that in a fish, that's an adaptation to very, very clear water and high water quality. And this only lives in Scioto Brush Creek, a tributary of the lower Scioto River down in Scioto County. That's it. Something drastic happened to that stream, we lose all those. Well, here's a more obvious indicator of good water quality and a success story. You know, not all is gloom and doom, but that's a hen common merganser with chicks that are probably a week old. You know, I think for about 2 weeks, they right on the mom's back, which is what's going on here. But there's way too many little chicks to fit on her back. So it's this constant fight as the guys in the back knock ones off the back, they get on there, just constant like that rotation. But common mergansers, at the time of the first breeding bird atlas in Ohio, which was from 82 to 87, there were no nesting common mergansers in Ohio. Now they've got to be in at least 20 counties. And it seems like new stream systems every year they're discovered nesting. This is because those streams are getting healed. The woods is maturing along them, and there's more cavities and nesting cavities, and the water quality is better. So if we can turn things around. Here's a great example of that. This is one though that I do worry about. This is a Louisiana water thrush, and they nest in sites similar to the stream I showed you for the darters, smaller streams with a lot of woods along them. If you clear the timber on a small stream with water thrushes, they're gone. They will not nest there anymore. So as a point of trivia, out of the 38 species of warblers that breed in Eastern North America, this is the 4th rarest one. That's not well known, less than 500,000 individuals. So this is one to really use as a totem for stream protection. Here's the opposite case of the water thrush. This is a male chestnut-sided warbler on an oak, which they really like oaks, and that's one we all know. 14th most common warbler, 18 million estimated to be out there. John James Audubon, in all his roaming throughout Eastern North America in the around the turn of the 1800s, only saw this species once. Pottstown, Pennsylvania, 5 of them, shot them all. That's how they could. That's how they bird watched in his day, but never saw them again. This is remarkable. If you go to McGee Marsh on a good May day now, you could see 100 of these or more. It's increased. It's one of the very, very few warblers that has increased because they like successional habitats. So all the logging operations as they regenerate, that's chestnut-sided warbler habitat. A rare case of a winner in that world. But plants, I'm a big plant photographer too, with good reason. I spent much of my career as a botanist, so I do have an interest in them, but they make everything go around. Everything almost, there are some exceptions, but is directly tied right back to plants, sometimes in incredibly specific ways. And so my bucket list is to shoot every native plant in Ohio, which is about 1,800 species. And I'm well on the way. I'm way over 1,000 for sure, but a lot of them are conspicuous. This is the state wildflower, the large flowered trillium, in a sensational display in Highland County, Ohio. And that's a very common one. This is one that's not as well known. It's mostly only in southern and parts of eastern Ohio. This blue-eyed Mary, which is an annual, one of our very few annual wildflowers, and grows in profusion, sometimes by the tens of thousands, blooms in April. Squirrel corn, that's Dutchman's breeches, lesser known little brother, pretty common though. Then you get into some of the rare things too, like shooting star. By the way, I probably didn't use flash on any of these, just as a photo footnote. I don't like flash. I think it imparts a harshness to the subject I just personally don't care for. Tripod, live view. I don't even, 2-second timer delay, if not a remote shutter release. I don't even want to be touching the camera. Wind is not your friend, so you can't have wind to do it that way. Sometimes multi-second shutter exposures. 5.6, 7.1 is my favorite working area. I want that combination of bokeh, like that nice blurred background, yet enough sharpness throughout my subject. So there's a bit of an art, I think, to shooting plants well. They seem like they'd be easy because they just sit there. Not really. I can think of a lot of animals that are a lot easier to shoot than plants. Here's a fire pink that was shot using the black velvet trick, which I do a fair bit. I have a 8.5 by 11 cardboard with black velvet, like Elvis Presley used painted on, glued to that. And this way I don't have to pick my subject or hurt it or anything, but it, this was grown in Shawnee Forest, this common fire pink, but it was getting all kinds of clutter. So I slipped my black velvet in behind it. Voila, I got this instant made black bokeh. That shutter speed was 13 seconds. It was almost dark out. There was zero wind. I was with a buddy of mine. We were both shooting. I said, hey man, hold the black velvet back there for me. And he's like, come on, man, when is this going to be done? It was like 13 seconds because there was almost no light. And I'm shooting at ISO 100 or 200. I don't like going over 200 with plants. There's no need to. Usually, I want the cleanest possible image. That's true across the board, but with plants, you can get away with that. So shutter speed's irrelevant, is I guess what I'm saying with plants. As long as no wind's there, and it's more driven by aperture and ISO to me than it is shutter speed, where shutter speed is a huge driver with bird photography. Here's another case of the black velvet trick of the state endangered white lady slipper. Of course, I'm never going to pick one of these. I isolated it with my black velvet. And this grows in up near Lake Erie. One of only 2 sites. Downy lobelia, this is using a natural bokeh, but this subject had a lot of clearance behind it before you hit the plant. So I could use a 5.6 or so aperture and create bokeh myself. Back to black velvet for a Virginia chain fern, which I wanted to show all the spore cases on the back. Ferns, of course, reproduce through spores, windborne spores that come out of those little brown cases. This was using blue sky. I love blue sky in certain situations, which we don't see a lot of that in the winter, but this was just getting under my subject and shooting up at the sky of this purple swamp aspen. Well, this is a Adams County prairie. Adams County prairies are just amazing. All prairies are amazing, but that's all blazing star taken at the crack of dawn with the sun just coming up over in the background. And I just wanted the landscape scale picture. Here's a rare denizen of the oak openings, if you're familiar with that, the prairies west of Toledo, Ohio. And gentians are always cool. We don't have many in Ohio. This is the rarest, or second at least rarest, state endangered soapwort gentian. And so anyways, using all my techniques I told you earlier on the tripod, all that stuff, and that flower fly landed. And I loved it. So, I made him part of the photo. He's got nothing to do with the pollination of this. It was just a perch for him. These are only pollinated by large bumblebees that can force their way into that sac-like flower. And there's a bumblebee, except it's not a bumblebee. This is another of these bizarre bumblebee mimics, except this isn't a robber fly like I showed you before. This is a flower fly, believe it or not, completely harmless. It only eats nectar and pollen. Yeah, looking pretty brutal, and it's a fairly sizable fly too. Here's a robber fly, and oh my God, I mean, I think my point with all this is all these plants I showed you, that's where you get all these insects. Plant diversity breeds animal diversity, and it all starts at the insect layer. And oh my God, they're just endless pools of subjects in these places. But that's a red-footed cannibal fly. That's a true horror show. That's one of the few invertebrate animals known to eat vertebrate animals, hummingbirds. That's how big this fly is. Here he's got some sort of big tachinid fly that he caught on Virginia mountain mint. So, botany does meet zoology, and that's what I was kind of getting into with these tales about all these things, and the plant animal interaction. That's a huge source of interest to me, at least. And milkweeds, of course, everyone knows that story. By the way, that common milkweed photo was taken with my 800 millimeter bird lens. I use telephotos on plants a lot if they're bigger plants. But we all know the case of the monarch that starts from the little egg only on milkweeds. That's the only group of plants they eat. And there's the caterpillar, and then the beautiful chrysalis, and then the story of the butterfly, which then comes out and nectars on lots of native plants like this very weedy but native heath aster, and it migrates to Mexico. That's a very well-known story. And I like to tell it too and take those pictures, but there's a lot of cooler stuff in that that isn't nearly as well known. One of them involves this. We have very, very few native rhododendrons in Ohio, I think 5. And the deciduous rhododendrons are known as azaleas. And this is one of those. This is only in select areas in Southern Ohio. It's rare. The pinkster flower, Rhododendron paraclimonilites, if you can say that. I can't. But there's a really special pollinator associated with this, and I really wanted to get it. These bloom in late April into May. And it's swallowtail butterflies, the only pollinator for this gorgeous azalea. And the heavyweight in that group, others will work them, but it's the spicebush swallowtail that only comes off of 2 plants, spicebush and sassafras. That's all the caterpillars eat. So you have to have those. There's always a suite of ingredients to develop these pollinators that go out and then work plants that they would never eat. So anyway, there's a bunch swarming the azalea in Shawnee, and then there's the money shot. So this just came to light recently. The real long wings of swallowtails, you've noticed this when they're at flowers, they're always flapping those wings. Well, that's what transfers the pollen from those anthers way out on those thread-like filaments to the stigma inside of the flower. It needs something with long wings and a lot of reach to do it. And there's your pollinator. 2 guys fighting over a flower there. Well, the same spicebush swallowtail, and I'm just picking one butterfly. I mean, there's a lot of butterflies. All of them are doing something like this, but that's on one of our rarest orchids in Shawnee State Forest, Southern Ohio, the orange or yellow fringed orchid, and they're huge pollinators of that. Again, long nectar spurs on the flowers, only something with a long proboscis like a butterfly can access that. Here's how you grow the, this is kind of what we did with our new book, except for moths, but here, you know, these recipes, if you want to grow this for yourself, you can do it in any yard practically with a spicebush swallowtail. Just have spicebush plant on the left or a sassafras tree plant on the right. Now you've got the caterpillar host plant, the only thing the caterpillars will eat. Then go out and look at your spicebush some summer, and if you see a leaf rolled up like that, bingo, you've scored. And if you carefully look inside of the leaf, that is the daytime bivouac for the caterpillar. This is a young caterpillar. They grow through 5 molt stages called instars, but when they're little, they look like bird droppings, real slimy, even though they're not. It's a visual deterrent because no one likes to eat bird droppings apparently, but notice the eyes. When they mature to the last instar stage, they are the spitting image of tropical tree snakes. I mean, it's eerie how much they look like some of those. And this is a group of butterflies that's tropical in its origins, you know, and birds would know that. They would look at that and a magnolia warbler, oh my God, it's a tree snake, and maybe not eat it. And then finally they transform in this amazing metamorphosis. And that's the chrysalis of the spicebush swallowtail stuck to a sassafras tree, one of its host plants. And then next year, the butterflies come out, or later in the year, they have multiple broods each year, and they set to work doing what they do. This is on one of our rare phloxes, the smooth phlox of Southern Ohio. So you can do this, you can grow it. That's what our whole book is about. Using our photos. I got to use over 500 of my photos in one crack in that book. And that's this whole world of this synergy between native plants growing Lepidoptera, moths and butterflies. All moths and butterflies have a caterpillar phase, one of the 4 parts of their life cycle. And those are works of art. Oh my God, if you're into photography and you're exposed to something like this black spotted prominent, you'll go crazy. And then you just want to hunt caterpillars. They're remarkable. Here's a butterfly caterpillar. I just showed you a moth. This is on its host plant, which is wild senna. The fruit of the senna is below the caterpillar. The caterpillar is segmented just like the fruit. Sits there all day. It's so impossible to see these. It's ridiculous. That's a bird deterrent right there. When it's that kind of visual stuff going on, it's usually sharp-eyed birds they're trying to thwart. There's what that becomes. You can grow it. All you have to do is have wild senna or partridge pea in your yard. You'll spawn the caterpillars, and then you get these big flying lemon wedges flying around later. Here it is pollinating cardinal flower. This is a white dotted prominent, obscure little moth caterpillar, except it's a pretty big caterpillar eating a black oak. Not too hard to see there. And a chickadee could spot that. If a chickadee does spot that and approaches, it will rear up like a cobra coming out of the guy's basket. It'll start waving its head back and forth. It takes its mandibles, those aren't eyes at all, bears the mandibles, and they look like scary snake eyes and sort of like fangs. It's really crazy to see this. If the bird pushes it farther, the white spotted prominent caterpillar coils up like a snake and throws its head over the loop. Believe me, that is an evolutionary effort to thwart birds that are sharp-eyed, spook them off by looking like something dangerous. And then there's the moth. This is often a reverse ugly duckling tail where the larvae far outshine the moths that they become. Crazy one that's a specialist on elm, only on elm, the double-toothed prominent. It's serrations on the back of its body, mimicking the serrations of the elm leaf. Red wash prominent, just this crazy looking thing that looks like dead leaf tissue from afar, really big, cuckoos like these, because there's a lot of meat to one of those. Green striped maple worm, really common, mostly specialist of maples. Pretty little caterpillar, but look what it becomes. Crazy. The rosy maple moth. The caterpillar goes by a different name than the moth. That's not rare in this world. Pink and yellow, looks like a flying Teletubby. It's a what's that? Silk moth. It's one of the silk moths. They don't feed. It's a flying gonad, if I can be crude. It just lives for about a week to find a mate, and if it's female, dump the eggs. It lives as a caterpillar far longer. But you go, why would you want to be pink and yellow? How's it going to hide? What's pink and yellow out there? One of its host plant seeds. So that's red maple samaras or seeds hanging there, and there's the little moth. Another example of crypsis is this one. This is a blinded sphinx. We have a big group of sphinx moths in Ohio, and they're really, really cool, all of them. But this caterpillar is really amazing on this one. It's a late season one. September would be when you'd look. And a lot of our leaf tissue is forming necrotic patches as it dies at that time of year, like that ironwood foliage. And the little cat, they'll just hang in there. And oh my God, even the sharpest eye warbler is going to have a tough time seeing that. This was a holy grail that took me years to get. This is a much hated plant, greenbriers or sawbriars, woody climbing semi-lilies of woodland understory, and have thorns, so they really scrape you up. Hunters hate this stuff. Everyone hates it. You know, if we don't like something because it annoys us, we want to kill it all. Huge mistake with this. It's native. All 7 species we have are native. They can be quite showy, like this sawbriar in fall. But there's some real specialists that only live on sawbriar. And one of the coolest ones of all is the curved-lined owlet. This is its caterpillar hanging on a sawbriar leaf. Big caterpillar, but incredibly hard to see. It looks just like a dead leaf of the plant hanging there. And if you actually puff on it or blow on it slightly, it'll start twisting just like a dead leaf in the breeze. And I finally caught up with these a few years ago and was able to photograph them. But in the world of caterpillars, one of the heavy lifters for birds conservation are the inchworms. The geometrid family of moths, it's enormous, many species. And we've all seen little inchworms. They don't have the legs in the middle of the body, so they loop as they walk. That's the head, that's the tail. And they sit there all day like a stick. I mean, they're invisible practically at rest. And that's how they avoid the birds, or try to. But as a sidebar related to that is this moth petal mimicry. So here's a plant, probably most of us know, it's the mayapple that looks like little umbrellas coming out of the forest floor and in spring. And then when it blooms in mid-spring, the beautiful waxy white flowers are held under the leaves. And you got to look under there to see them oftentimes. But here's the adult of the little inchworm I just showed you. It's a mayapple flower petal mimic. The venation on the moth's wings match that of the petals to a T, and it just gets in there. Sometimes 3 will tint them around the stamens like this one's doing. You can't see them. You don't ever want anyone to show you this in the wild, because then you're doomed to look at every map you come across trying to find this. But back to inchworms, there's a maple spanworm, super common. They're within a stone's throw of where you are, wherever that is. If there's maple trees around, that's what they feed on, and they look just like the maple twigs and sit there all day just like that. And birds eat them prolifically because they still find them. But here's a scale of how important this is. This is not in Ohio, but it's from forest systems just like we have here. But it's the comparative biomass of a deciduous forest. Caterpillar dwarfing everything. This was the Algonquin forests of Canada, the southern part, the Carolinian forest. It's similar to ours, but they used a moose as the big mammal, but you can hardly see it down at the bottom. A salamander is bigger than the moose. And then you can see the other subjects. The upshot here is caterpillar biomass dwarfs everything. It dwarfs the white-tailed deer population in Ohio. This is incredibly important for bird conservation, many other things as well, but especially for birds. And people can relate much better to birds and all that stuff I just showed you. But we have to walk them through the steps required. Birds don't just develop in a vacuum, as you all know. So that's what all that crypsis, that camouflage I just showed you, that's all about birds. Visual predators that are so good. And even those little inchworms, they find them. Here's a little tiny golden crown kinglet that overwinters in Ohio, completely insectivorous, almost totally feeding on little inchworm caterpillars that overwinter in the caterpillar stage. And the little guys here find them prolifically. Scarlet tanagers wouldn't have them without caterpillars. They would go extinct. Indigo buntings, which eat a lot of seeds at certain times of the year, but not when they're in the breeding season. They're prolific caterpillar feeders. Yellow-billed cuckoos and black-billed cuckoos feed mostly on caterpillars. It's the core of their diet, especially the larger species. So you wouldn't have those. Even vegans, because song sparrows and sparrows are mostly vegan, except when they have chicks in the young. They capture caterpillars prolifically, like this one is done, for their chicks, because the chicks need the protein source to grow. They won't do that off just vegetation. So, you know, songbirds in general have to have caterpillars. Yellow warblers like that one, extinct, no caterpillars, or native plants spawn caterpillars. Same for this holy grail for a bird watcher here, mourning warbler. Redstarts eat tons of caterpillars and many other kinds of insects in this case too. Same with hooded warbler and that beautiful song of woodland understories. The horribly named worm-eating warbler, which was named at a time when entomological ignorance was much higher. It's a caterpillar-eating warbler, not worms. Here's a case in point. I took this photo in Shawnee State Forest last spring. It's a cerulean warbler, one of the fastest declining of our warblers and one of the rarest overall. And it had this big caterpillar, which I did not recognize when I made the photograph. But I quickly did, because I saw like 6 of them throughout the course of the morning, just dangling around. Caterpillars often dangle on a belay line, silken line, because they're safer out in space than they are up on a twig, less likely to be found. But anyway, I was able to figure out what it was, Georgian prominent moth caterpillars, and they had a boom year. Many of those moths have boom and bust cycles, and this was a boom cycle year for them, and these caterpillars were everywhere. And I will guarantee you that the cerulean warblers had a higher productivity nesting season, at least in Shawnee that year, because of this. They're just so tied into this stuff. Golden wing warblers eat smaller caterpillars, and many of them with that fine-toothed little bill. This is one of our fastest declining warblers of all. It's a long story on that, and it's not totally related to food sources and whatnot. But anyway, if you appreciate a bird like that, you should appreciate native plants and caterpillars as well. So there's the man, by the way, on the left. That's me on the right, but that's Doug Tallamy. Some of you probably have heard of him. He's done more than any other person to educate people about what I just briefly talked about, the linkage between native flora and higher animal communities. And Doug, I've been a friend of his for a long time, and he wanted to see a certain bird. And I lead trips in northern Michigan every year, or used to. I'm not doing as much now, but You might already know what he wanted to see. He'd never seen one. And he's a hardcore photographer. That's his Nikon 600, the black one. And we were easily able to show Doug many of these, and he got photos and everything. That's the Kirtland's warbler, the rarest of our warblers. It's still with us. One's extinct. So the upshot of everything I just said is no caterpillars, no native plants, silent forests. All those birds we love, or a lot of them, forget about it. It's a huge invasion too. 1 billion warblers invade North America every year, including Ohio, either transit through here or stay here to nest. And then in this huge sweeping movement, most of them go back to their evolutionary origins in the tropics of Middle America, primarily. But a lot of people like them. This is really important to this message, in my view. You can, this is McGee Marsh, if you didn't already guess that. And, you know, they're probably all looking at warblers because everyone likes warblers. It seems like more than anything else in spring. And a lot of people like warblers and birds in general, to the tune of over $75 billion a year in expenditures related to mostly bird watching. It's crazy. The last slide says it all. That's over twice Coca-Cola's worldwide gross receipts, not net, gross. And I can't help myself because I know these statistics, and this is dated. They just came out with a new one. I'll have to update that because now it's even higher than what I show here. But just think, if all these people weren't like cats and could be herded and on the same page as a unified constituency for conservation, we'd be untouchable. Forget about it. You wouldn't, they wouldn't be destroying all those prairies and things like that. We had to have a lot more say in things. I don't know, maybe some great leader will come along and be able to unify all of us at some point and get there, but we ain't there yet. Anyway, I wanted to finish with that. That's the title of my book, where I was able to use a lot of my photos. My co-author Chelsea is a great photographer, and she's got maybe pushing 100 photos in there too. And then the rest are mine. We had to borrow a handful, but only a very small handful. For me, that's 20 years of moth photography. But anyway, the overarching thing with the book is just to try and get people interested in using native flora, using moths as the totem in this case. So that'll be out in late February. Be great if you bought one. And that's it. Thank you.
Jim, thank you for your program.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to try and stop that.
Yeah.
There we go.
We had a couple of questions that came up during the chat. One was how you managed to photograph the underwater fish that you showed.
Great question. And I would have done that, except I knew I was going to run long, and that's why I didn't do it. But I'll tell you really quick, it's a lot of work. These are in far-flung places often where the subjects are. We lugged a card table and a fish tank to the stream. We set up everything right by stream side. It's a lot of setup work. We take cobble from the stream and wash it. We take distilled water as well. Cold water. We want it to be roughly what the stream temperature is. You got to wash all the rocks because they're all covered with silt and things, and it'll cloud your tank right up. We've learned this the hard way. It's just a lot of work. But anyway, we go in with seines, catch our subjects, put them in the tank, work fast, and put the animals back in the stream so they don't get, we don't want to kill any of them. And so they're usually back in the stream in 15 minutes or so. And we get our shots, and I'm using a 100mm macro lens primarily, often popping a little flash through the fish tank to get it. That I do use flash on.
Okay, and the other thing that's amazing is how do you remember all that stuff in your head?
I don't know. I can't remember anything except stuff I'm interested in. So that helps me, I guess. I don't know, but there's a lot more I don't know than what I do know. And it's all a learning curve, just learning the photography and the subjects, but you never get bored.
Yeah. Any other questions from the folks out there? We had a good participation tonight. Anybody else we got time for just a couple of questions here. Anybody have any questions for Jim while you got his undivided attention?
So I have a question, Jim. This is Steve. I just love the relationships that you displayed between all these elements kind of in this ecosystem. And then you gave a couple of kind of negative examples, and we see that all around us. I mean, we're kind of preaching to the choir in some ways. These, I think, nature lovers probably on this program now. But I suspect that even during the pandemic, we had many more people get interested all of a sudden in spending time in nature and bird watching and tending gardens, things like that. And your kind of last point is, how can is there some way we can do something? Is there some way we could use our photos? I'm wondering, is iNaturalist a tool as citizen scientists to add it on there? I'm not sure that ever impacts legislatures. Is there a way that we could kind of collectively share voices, or do you have any thoughts about what actually could be done? Is it petitions? Is it just actually talking with people? I'll just give some examples locally. In addition to development, I see some beautiful areas just being totally overrun with invasives. And for this area I'm in, it's these invasive buckthorns. Yeah. And it grows so fast, they're wiping out beautiful flora and that's in these areas. And I keep thinking if there was some way to get legislatures to pay attention about how beautiful, the Huffman prairies are, or the Springfield bogs. And yeah, I'm just wondering if there's some way that we could all do something together. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I do. I have some thoughts on it, but they may not be the greatest. But here's what I can tell you, because I worked for the Division of Wildlife for quite a while, which is the hunting and this, so-called sportsmen, hunters and fishermen. But so starting back in the 30s, that side of things organized. And this all arose out of the Dust Bowl. I won't bore everyone with history here, but they came together as Ducks Unlimited. It was in 1937. And then a lot of the conservation organizations, Isaac Walton, actually the Sierra Club precedes them all, but it was mostly these hunting groups that came out around, let's say the 30s is when this really started. And they've been organized, really well organized ever since. And they tend to operate as a unified block. We've all seen examples of this. It can be done. We have never done that. The non-consumptive, as they would call us, side of things, have never done that. We have Audubon. We have the Nature Conservancy, which is mostly apolitical. Audubon, not so much, but they don't war or fight with each other, but they're really not working together. And a lot of that's because of fundraising and things of that nature. Where the sportsmen have been much better about it. So it's a culture we've never invented for ourselves, in my opinion. So I don't have a great idea other than this pipe dream of what I think really need. And I know you've dabbled in some of this, you know what I'm talking about, but what we really need would be like the United States constellation of natural history. And we all are in that, because I used to be president of the Ohio Ornithological Society and a few other things. And I would meet with, sometimes political types. And usually about the second question they'll ask you, they won't ask it first usually, but they'll go, well, how many people you got? They want to gauge your power. You know this very well. And I go, well, we're really committed, and we have 750 people maybe, but they're like, well, whatever. It's not very impressive to them. If you could go, I don't know, I think it's like 18 million. Oh, you'd stop them in your tracks. Believe me, you would get a seat at the table. So that's what I really think needs to happen. Just a unified group where there's power in numbers, because that's what the political arena seems to respond to.
Yeah, someone in the audience suggested here, to make your own national park in your front yard, get rid of your lawn, plant prairie natives and oaks, and then photo blitz the return of bugs to your newly rewild space. This is what somebody said in the audience. I have another question for you here, Jim, from the audience here. Do you do any workshops?
I haven't been lately. I haven't had time. Actually, a woman up your way, Debbie DiCarlo, and I did them for a couple years, including those northern Michigan trips that were so great. But then COVID hit and killed that. And she, I think, has picked it up on a limited basis. And I got launched off on these book projects and some other things. And haven't done it, but I'm glad that for that question, because that indicates maybe at least one person would be interested in one. Because I would like to do them. I like doing macro workshops a lot.
Mhm.
It's great. You can go anywhere and really learn. So thank you for that. And it's something I want to get back into.
Okay, that sounds good. Got a lot of compliments to your presentation and to your wealth of knowledge there. I'm not seeing any more questions come in. It's been a good show. So thanks again, Jim. Thanks for everybody who came in for our virtual presentation tonight. And if you're not a member of the Photo Society, join us and we can do more of this stuff. Thank you, Jim. Thank everybody
Thank you.
else.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.